Welcome. Thank you for joining us this afternoon. Hope everybody had a nice lunch and a break. We're going to get started here. A couple of housekeeping items before we get started, and then we'll do an introduction of the panel and go from there. So let's see. Everything you need for today's presentation can be found in the mobile app. Simply select this session from the agenda. If you're looking for our presentation, there's a PDF version that you can find under Documents. If you're seeking continuing education credit, please make note of the code word that will be displayed on the last slide of the presentation. You'll need the code word to complete the CE credit survey. And CE surveys can be found under Surveys for each session that has been approved for credit. And this is important. You must complete a CE survey for each session for which you are seeking credit. Also, your mobile app is where you can utilize the Q&A portion of this presentation. If you have questions, please submit them through the app. And we plan on answering them at the end of our presentation unless one comes through that seems like it's specific to where we're at. And lastly, please let us know you're here and share your feedback by checking in and rating the session, especially if you like it. So, my name is Beth Cleary, and I'm serving as both a panelist and moderator, double duty here for our session today. And I'm with the City of Milwaukee, the executive director for our 457 plan. And a little bit about my background. I've been in the space of retirement industry for the last 16 years. First third, I was serving as general counsel to our pension system in the city. And then I moved over to the administration side of things as deputy director of our pension system. And then most recently, I have been serving as ED for our 457 plan, which I absolutely love.
Hi, I'm Stephanie Linker. I lead marketing for the retirement group at BlackRock. Our mission is to help more and more people experience financial well-being. I've been at BlackRock for my whole career in various roles in New York and Hong Kong. And I've had the opportunity to learn how people think about saving and investing across various countries and cultures. I currently lead a team responsible for retirement thought leadership, integrated marketing, and most relevant for today, partnering with plans and record keepers like yourselves on participant engagement. Over to you.
Great. Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Lynn Smith, and I head technology and client experience at Mission Square Retirement. Some of you may have known that as ICMARC, but we rebranded about a year ago or so. I've been in this industry for a long time, back to the early 90s, and I've witnessed firsthand the evolution of, today what we call financial wellness, but back then it was participant education, and it was basically fun fact sheets. Financial literacy, it was called, retirement readiness, we've called it, financial wellness, and sometimes now just wellness. So, if we can get to the slides. I think this discussion is just as pertinent today as ever, in fact, even more so, perhaps. The COVID-19 pandemic really caused an issue with many state and local workers. And so this data here indicates 44%, almost half of workers have been negatively impacted by COVID. This research is from a March 2020 survey of 1,100 state and local government employees. It was done by Mission Square Research Institute, which did surveys over, 3 surveys over the time of the pandemic. And this number continued to get worse all the way through March 2022. And then if you take a look at the actions that these employees took, it's all the things we don't want them to do, right? Taking money out of an emergency fund, increasing their debt, reducing their retirement savings. And if you think about it, it's almost like a double whammy, because we also have the Great Resignation happening. And the research that we did looking at the state and local workforce, besides the employees feeling the crunch, employers are feeling the crunch, right? You've all seen employment levels down by almost 4%. So that means 730,000 positions since the beginning of COVID no longer exist in the government space. Job opening rate has been the highest as it's been in over 20 years. The quit rate is the highest over the summer of 2020 and remains high even now in government jobs. And then on top of that, retirements are at a 20-year high. And so just to put that in perspective, back in 2009, in the wake of the Great Recession, when we asked state and local HR directors about retirement rates, it was about 12%. Now, it's 38%. So significant, impact in the workforce. And then on top of that, I guess you might even say it's the triple whammy, because now we have inflation, right? And inflation affecting employees' personal budgets, but also impacting government budgets and the budgets that you all have to spend on retracting and attaining employees and financial wellness and all of that. So I would say designing and implementing financial wellness programs got a little more complicated, right, over the last couple of years. And while financial wellness programs have been introduced and expanded very often in the private sector, few initiatives have been developed and tailored specifically for use by the 19 million state and local workers. So that's what we'll talk about today.
All right, financial wellness. What does it mean? It means a lot of different things to a lot of different people, and I think you just got a flavor of that from what Lynn was just sharing. But the way that I look at it and think about it is it's a 360 approach to understanding your financial situation, including financial literacy. And you can break it down to some basic categories, and this is kind of the way to, from my experience, to kind of think about and approach it. It can be the topics of earnings, savings and investments, spending, borrowing, and protection. When I think of financial wellness, retirement readiness is a component of it, but if you think about the big picture, it's so much more. It's that larger understanding of where you're at, what's standing in your way, what are your dreams and goals, and how do you get there. And next slide, please. Here's another conceptual way to think about the building blocks of financial wellness. I like this picture because that image shows you this foundation of financial literacy and budgeting. And I think it's really important, especially as we work with the spectrum of participants in our plans, everyone from someone who has a GED equivalency to people who have terminal degrees, and everybody in between. What does that mean in terms of where they're at? And also, when you think about the concept of wealth building, think back to high school. What were we taught? Maybe we had an economics class and we learned about the stock market and what an IRA is, but for the most part, there's not a whole lot of education out there. And if you think about the people that are equipped to know what wealth building is and how to do it and how to get there, what has to happen? They have to have generations of examples before them, people who pass down that knowledge base, whether it's how to buy a house, how to establish good credit early on so that you can one day buy that car you want. How do you do all these basic things? So when I look at it in terms of our participants, I think about it from that perspective. And when you think about the lens and how you approach this topic, I think it's going to inform what your programs look like and how you address meeting your participants' needs. So through that lens, let's see, thank you. So this is a life cycle, and I just want to use a disclaimer. I know it's for a heterosexual male. There's different life cycles out there. But this is a good illustration to think about the different stages that our employees are at. When you think about the very beginning, the accumulation stage with bachelorhood, what's happening? No dependents. What are their short-term goals? Maybe a car, housing. What's the most important thing at this stage? Compound interest, right? You have to get in front of your participants, have to teach them about the eighth wonder of the world, as Einstein called it. They have a long runway, and they have to know about it, because how many retirees have you talked to who said, I wish I would have started sooner. I wish I would have known. And you can start that at the gate, right off the gate with the new employee orientation. I know we don't have just young people, but that is an excellent entry-level starting point to reach out to people. If you move on to the next phase, you start having one extra dependent in your life, more expenses, maybe you want to do different housing, you want to look at maybe a home, vacation funds, so things start to shift, paying off student loans. When you become parents, more dependents, more expenses, protection needs change, your long-term goals, school changes, you're still paying off your loans, retirement, we know all the different stages from hire through retire. But when you start thinking about these life stages in terms of your education goals, in terms of the different points to reach out to people, even something as simple as reminding people to change their beneficiary and update that for life event changes, all of that goes under the umbrella of financial wellness. So here's an example of some of our topical presentations that we offer with our financial wellness program that have been established to kind of target those life stages. And we try to get in front of different people with the different place that they're at in their life. Everything from the learning about budgeting, learning about that plan for your someday when you have that long runway, all the way to how to optimize your Social Security strategy, retirement readiness, and everything in between. Now, one thing I have to put a plug in here for, if you haven't already put this on your radar screens, any programming you have right now or any type of, let's say you send out emails, let's say you have newsletters, make sure that you get in front of people in your plan about the PSLF program, the Public Service Loan Forgiveness Program. It is so time sensitive and critical that we let people know about this, especially before the expiration date of Halloween. Think of Cinderella and a pumpkin, because when Halloween happens, that temporary waiver program that's currently in existence, and if you don't know about it, we did do a NAGDA Connect, and I'm pretty sure it's recorded, so you can go back and listen to it, but it's huge. We see employees getting loan forgiveness amounts in the 10,000s to 6 figures in some cases. This is money on the table that's available for them to take advantage of, because every single one of our employees, since they work for government, they qualify if they have a student loan just by virtue of their employer. And then that temporary waiver, if you don't know about it, ask me specifics. It's really nuanced and complex, so I'm not going to get into it, but it's an important deadline that you need to know about. And here's another point, too, when it comes to the programming efforts. Why us? Why would we, as plan sponsors, be in a place where we should be doing these financial wellness programs? Well, if you think about it, we are the fulcrum point of getting information out there. People look to us as experts on this topic. And I'll get into that later on in terms of how you design and put together your program. And it requires a lot of recognizing stakeholders and realizing that you are that SME, that subject matter expert. And if you don't feel like you are, you got a ton of resources, and NAGDA is your #1 resource to get you there. So now we're going to move on, and Stephanie's going to zoom out and talk about other tools and recent stats that are impacting employees and retirement.
Thanks. So we like to think about this across the participant journey, and I think Beth just gave a good example of that. But knowing that a saver's needs and sort of understanding changes from hire to retire. So we have some examples here of some of the mediums that could be used to deliver education. Tools and calculators being a common one that we talk about, but important to think about what could be used to educate someone who's just starting out. It could be something about understanding compound interest, or perhaps what products are available on a menu. All the way through to a saver who may be approaching retirement and is looking to understand spending. In the middle, and you mentioned, sort of how education has evolved, but we're always thinking about what could be most effective when it comes to education. And so that's your typical, of course, brochures and collateral, but also thinking about bite-sized and approachable content, 1-minute videos, different series, charts, and helpful ways to explain concepts. I like to talk about using human language, right? So removing the jargon and explaining this in a way that anybody could understand. We use a lot of analogies, so if we're talking about the target date fund and we're explaining a glide path, perhaps using an airplane flight path to help bring that to life. And then ultimately, we know that, as I mentioned, everybody has diverse needs and different ways of learning. And so no one plan has the same education strategy, and nor should they. And some examples to bring this to life are a large plan we implemented on the West Coast, where we worked with the plan to create communications in Spanish, Vietnamese, and English to make sure this was accessible to everyone. There's another plan on the East Coast where they felt like not enough people were aware of what was offered, and so we helped them create a social media campaign. And this isn't something we're tweeting from our own account, but we worked with them on a strategy and assets that they could then use. We've done this same thing with text messages for a plan who had a lot of people in the field and didn't feel like they were sitting at computers. So just getting really thoughtful about what's the best way to reach people. And then the last piece I would just note is the train-the-trainer model that we often lean into, where perhaps there's an HR team or other sort of boots on the ground that would benefit from learning about the product, the strategy, the solution, and could then pass that along in a scaled way. With all of that in mind, we've always felt like it's important to sort of get in the shoes of the investors that we ultimately serve and the plans that we partner with. And so that better informs our approach to financial wellness. We do an annual survey. This is our 7th year. We all love surveys up here. But this is called the Read on Retirement. And we went out end of March, end of April, when there was really peak volatility and peak inflation as a coincidence, but we went to over 300 plan sponsors, over 2,600 savers, and then over 300 retirees, and this was across public and private plans. And what we found was that confidence when it comes to savers thinking about the retirement that they want and if they'll be able to reach it has taken a dip for the first time since the pandemic started. It's still quite high, 63%, but this isn't surprising when you look at the economic climate and what's going on and how long sort of the pandemic has gone on for. Similarly, we have seen that around 40% have said that hardships related to the pandemic have set savers back. And the top reasons are not earning enough to save and high cost of living expenses, so pretty tied to inflation. Similarly, we also looked at emergency savings, and it's an area we've continued to study. We found that 65% of savers would save more if they had an emergency savings fund set aside. That's compared to 56% last year. So 56% last year, 65% this year, so people clearly see that connection between short and long-term savings. And that's especially prominent with younger generations. So 86% of Gen Z say they'd save more for the long term if they had that emergency fund set aside. We also looked at some data on access. So I think I don't need to preach to this room how important it is, access and people being able to save through a sponsored plan. For the first time, we looked at savers who are trying to save for retirement but don't have the ability to do so through an employer or state-sponsored plan. And so we're calling them independent savers here, but about half of them report they're on track for retirement versus the 63% of the workplace savers we just spoke about. And then about 23% say the pandemic has caused them to save less versus 14% of participants. Unsurprisingly to this group, I'm sure, savers have pretty high concerns around inflation, and we asked a lot about inflation this year, given what's going on. So 87% are worried about inflation. However, only about 4 in 10 participants say they have a strong understanding of the impact that inflation can have on their ability to save and spend. And so perhaps an education gap, although people are certainly feeling this at the gas pump, at the grocery store, and we know that sources like Bloomberg have predicted that US families could spend an average of $5,200 more, it's staggering, I guess, this year than previous years due to inflation. So top actions that we're seeing savers take in order to address this. We're seeing people 54% decrease spending on big ticket items and 42% decrease spending on consumables. And so those are pretty large numbers for people to change their spending habits. And then encouragingly, we're seeing about a third increase their saving rates and about a fifth are adjusting plan investments. When we took a deeper dive in plan investments, we looked at the target date fund, and about a quarter of people are unaware if they're even invested in a target date fund, which could highlight the need for greater education. People may not know what's actually in their plan or what's available to them. When we defined a target date fund and said, it's an age-based, diversified solution that evolves over time with professional management, 85% of participants were interested in one when they understood what it was. And again, just sort of highlighting the need to think about plan design and education and how that could help move the needle. And I'll close here. I'd be remiss to avoid talking about retirement income, especially with next month being Retirement Security Month, which I think is sponsored by NAGDA. So with the volatility that we've seen in coming out of the pandemic and the uncertainty, we're seeing more concern than ever about future spending due to the pandemic. We're also seeing that 90% of participants are interested in a product designed to help support this that would help generate income in retirement. We talk to retirees every year because hindsight is 20/20, right? And we want to get a sense of how they're feeling 10 plus years into retirement. 67% of retirees who are confident say that access to a pension makes them feel secure, that they have enough money to last. And we know that many of you have pensions or work with pensions, and so we are always thinking about how do we tie that together with defined contribution plans when thinking about retirement income. So now that I have talked about some of our broad research and really sort of breezed through it, we'll bring our discussion to life with Beth talking about her program, which recently won Plan Sponsor's Plan of the Year award. So over to you.
Thanks, Stephanie. So a snapshot of the City of Milwaukee 457 plan. This is in addition to our pension plan, as I mentioned before, and if you notice, our participation rates and saving rates are pretty good. We're proud of these rates, and one of the things that led to our success in getting our numbers up is we were able to do some design changes and include auto-enrollment. We have an opt-out option, and this only applies to general city. It does not apply to fire and police because they are still collectively bargained, whereas our general city employees are not. So, having instituted the best practice design changes about 6 years ago has really afforded capacity to focus on things like a financial wellness program. How did we get there? So our board took a hard look and sat down and said, what's our mission? So if you don't have one, I suggest you work on that. Just start, that's a great place to start. It helps to crystallize what your goal is. And I could probably, this would resonate with most everybody and what the work that they do. And bottom line here is we're trying to help people retire at the desired time with dignity and to enjoy sufficient income throughout retirement. That's our main goal. So then the board asked itself, are we doing that? Are we doing that across the board for every one of our employees? So what did we do? We started to benchmark, and we looked at it based off of gender, based off of race, age, salary quartile. We wanted to have a better understanding. And the answer was we were not. We had a lot of disparities. I'm sure a lot of your plans can probably relate. And that led to the conversation about the design changes. That was a big effort, and we have some people in this room that helped us get there, and some of my trustees as well. And that helped, that was the tide that rose all of our boats, and we were able to close those disparity gaps. So this is the financial wellness program that we have for the City of Milwaukee, and it's tethered to our overall wellness program that we have with the city. We're very fortunate in that we have an infrastructure in place and that it's monetarily incentivized. Our program for wellness has been around for over 12 years, and from the get-go, I was very impressed. I served on the initial labor management committee that chose our partner that we're still working with. We've done a few RFPs, but we've stuck with our partner. That is through the Medical College of Wisconsin. It's very educational based, and the reason why the city even looked at a wellness program in the first place was money. The healthcare costs were skyrocketing like everywhere, and we're Milwaukee. We like sausage, beer, cheese. We don't always have the best health record. So what did we try to do? This wellness program allowed us to, in exchange for people participating, we were able to get health assessments accomplished, which meant aggregate data. And also, we designed a healthy rewards program where people could engage and get points. In exchange for those points, we had different tiers, and you can get a max up to 700 if you and your spouse both qualify and get the max of points. The nice thing, too, is you do not have to have the city's health insurance to be eligible for this. So this is a very comprehensive programming that has evolved over the years. And like I said, we represent the financial wellness component of this program. The two ways that people receive points for the Healthy Rewards system when it comes to financial wellness is by participating both in seminars, financial wellness seminars, educational based, and also coaching. And coaching is done through consultations that are done with our record keepers educators. They know our plan inside and out. They also know our retirement benefits that complement what we have for a deferred comp. And we give double the points for the one-on-one counseling session because we're really trying to drive those conversations. We know that that's where the magic happens. That's where you can build rapport with people. People can ask vulnerable questions that they're not going to ask in group settings. And also, that's where you can just have a great springboard conversation and encourage follow-up conversations to check in and see how things are going with their goals. So the Healthy Rewards program, this, like I said, it started off with the biometric screenings, and then from there, there's a variety of ways you can get engaged. And by the way, it's worked. We saw 6 years of flat costs for our health insurance, which, again, Milwaukee, it's a big deal. We were able to also look at some of the trends and what was happening. And now that we're involved on the financial wellness side, we're able to look at this and understand our trends as well. So again, these are the two ways that people get points. They get 5 points for each financial wellness seminar and then double the points for the counseling session. They can get up to 30 points in the counseling session per year, per person. So if they and their spouse want to do 6 total, they can get 60 points that way, 30 each. All right, so our financial wellness seminars, it's similar to what I shared before, the topical. These are all different options that we have available. And now we've opened up in-person seminars, but mostly, like everybody else, the last 2 years, we've had to pivot. So what did we do? We went virtual, right? And how did you go virtual is a good question. For us, we tried to be really thoughtful and intentional about going virtual. We decided to do pre-recorded financial wellness seminars. The reason why we went with that route instead of live financial wellness seminars is we wanted to not necessarily herd cats. And it takes a lot of capacity to do those types of programming efforts. By going virtual and having it pre-recorded, we were able to utilize the platform of Brainshark. And we built in mechanisms to verify that people actually attended. We measured their the number of slides that they participated with, and the number of we measured how much the audio that they were exposed to, and then we had a built-in quiz for each of our seminars. And you had to get 5 out of 7 questions correct. You could redo it if you needed to, and then you would get a certificate. And then from there, we also included. These are examples of some of our online presentations. But we also tried to drive people towards that magic consultation session. So we included a slide in each of our presentations, and we reminded them they could get twice the points. We made it as easy as possible. We had a link, and they could click to their online scheduler, find the day and the time that works for them. Easy peasy. They're plugged in. The reason why our participants really like the online scheduling, the pre-recorded seminars is a lot of people out there like to cram, right? And they get their last minute points before the deadline. Well, this makes it really accessible because they can be on their couch at 2 a.m. in their PJs and get all the points they want. Meanwhile, they're learning all about financial wellness. And that leads to the point of meeting people where they're at. We've realized, too, that we were able to reach a ton more participants by having virtual options. And people who are in the field, who have third shifts, who have a difficult time showing up in the traditional hours of the day, this was a great option. And then this is another great tool. If you, you should talk to your record keeper to see if they have something similar, but thankfully Voya has this great assessment tool, and it basically helps you understand how you're doing with financial wellness. It looks at these 6 pillars, and you answer questions, and based off of that, you get your red, yellow, green light. And it tells you in all these broad-based categories, and again, this is that 360 look as to where you have to think, how you have to start thinking about how am I doing? How am I doing with my emergency savings, with my life insurance, with my debt, with my budgeting, all these things. What I love about this assessment is it helps serve as a springboard for future conversations. You can go back and look at that 6 months past and say, okay, here's where you were, here's what your goals were, here's the steps we talked about, how are you doing now? This is, I mentioned benchmarking before. We really like to benchmark, and we've been doing it with our financial wellness engagement as well. We want to show that this actually makes a difference, and we've seen that it does. So for those that do engage in our financial wellness, the 2 things that we measure are participation in the plan and contributions, and how they stack up and compare against those that don't engage. So you can see for yourself with the stats here, we have a higher participation rate in general, we have a higher savings rate, and you can see, because we're continuing to benchmark every quarter, we look at those categories I was telling you about: gender, race, salary, age. And every year I go back to my Common Council and I report at my budget hearing, and they can see the changes that we've made from all these design changes. And then I also report out and let them know about how this is going. This is really key because you can use this as leverage to explain to people, and people get the data, they see that the numbers actually speak for themselves and why it's so important. Okay, next I'm going to pass it on to Lynn, and she's going to talk about some other programs going on around the nation, and different examples and ways you can design a program, as well as ways to assess your program and wrap up things before we get to questions. So if you haven't already submitted questions, I remind you, use your app, and we'll get to those when we can.
Great, thanks, Beth. So Beth just gave you some great insights into how she evolved and strengthened the City of Milwaukee Financial Wellness Program, which is a very comprehensive program with really impressive results. But we also know that not one size fits all, and some of you are actually thinking about first starting up a financial wellness program. Others might be looking to strengthen something that exists already, but you all have different demographics in your communities, different budgets, different resources, and different approaches. So with that in mind, we thought it would be helpful to share or provide you access to case studies of 24 different jurisdictions. And this is, available to you to download. You can actually understand what each of these financial wellness programs did, ideas, advice, networking opportunities with them. These 24 actually were recipients of a grant from a program that was established back in September of 2020 to help communities create financial wellness programs or strengthen existing ones. And it was a joint grant effort by Mission Square Research Institute, plus the International Public Management Association for Human Resources, the National Association of State Treasurers Foundation, and the Wells Fargo Foundation. So entities that were interested in getting a grant submitted a request, and 24 were selected after review by a committee, and the grants were anywhere between $10,000 and $100,000, right? So this is the case studies as a result of those. And I can share a couple of takeaways from the case studies that were kind of common themes across all of them. One is that there's no one way to create a successful public sector employee financial wellness program. Some of these grantors did it all in-house, with in-house staff to design and implement the program. Others partnered with third parties, like their record keeper, an investment provider, someone else in the community to be able to provide the program. And some of them were all high-tech, right? Everything done electronically, internet. Others were very high-touch. And it was, wellness seminar engagements, in person with paper materials, and all sorts of combinations in between. And I can tell you that each of these different combinations were effective in their own way. So it's knowing your own audience. One of the other common themes is leverage existing resources. You don't need to recreate the wheel. So you probably have something in-house. There might be other agencies within the government that are doing some things. Your existing providers may have some things. Social Security agencies do free webinars. So there's lots of opportunity to kind of take existing pieces and not reinvent the wheel to get started. And one thing I can't emphasize enough, and you'll see it in these, is the importance of flexibility and creativity. And you heard Beth talk about the pivot, right? For flexibility, things happen. So, whether it's changes needed due to COVID and you need to do things more remote, whether it's difficulty getting hard to reach populations, or even restrictions in incentives, right? Whether you're giving dollars towards a health savings or a health retirement account, or whether you're just doing points so that you can, give out free t-shirts, right? Each one of those has its own obstacles to overcome, but I would encourage that, continue to try to be as creative and flexible as possible in creating. For today's session, I'm going to just highlight one case study from these 24, and then just another case study that is of interest. So this one happened to be Peoria, Arizona. Relatively small plan, right? It had 1,500 participants. It worked on a small budget, not a lot of high tech, leveraged their record-keeping partner, but they creatively created boot camps. And they did 4 one-day, 1-hour boot camps. One series targeted early career, one mid-career, one late career, and one nearing retirees, and kept it simple. If you completed the boot camp, you were eligible for a free financial consultation, and then they also did a wellness expo. One of the big successes here is that they felt like they got individuals who wouldn't normally have access to a financial advisor or a financial planner, took advantage of this free opportunity to talk to someone. And so it really increased the range of how they were able to access employees that normally wouldn't take advantage of this. Another great example, I think, and a really creative one, that leveraged sort of time and place is City of Anaheim played off of the theme of the summer, the Olympics, and National Retirement Security Week, and did a whole theme around saving for retirement and tying it to bring home the gold, right? And tied it to the Olympics. They gave points. Their points created a Vitality Leadership Board, and it was a 4-week program, and each week had a different theme and different challenges. So they started off with the preliminaries, right? And the preliminaries were, activities included enrolling in a plan, increasing contributions, signing up for online enrollment or accounts or e-delivery or text. The next week became the quarterfinals. Like the quarterfinals was activities like creating a financial wellness center profile, updating your plan beneficiaries. Third week was the semifinals. Activities were, deferring vacation and paid leave hours, attending a Social Security webinar, and then the final week, which was the finals, was meeting with a financial representative. And so, each one of these, employees got points, and the points totaled up, and of course at the end the top 3 winners received the gold, the silver, and the bronze level awards. So a really creative way to roll out and get employees' attention with financial wellness. So one of the most important things that came out of the discussions with the 24 jurisdictions that did these and the case studies is that it's really important to evaluate, and there's a lot of different ways to evaluate the success of a program. On the left-hand side are some of kind of the more common measures that we've seen in evaluating a program, whether it's the participation in an event or completion of something, satisfaction, self-reported changes to a financial attitude. Does somebody feel more confident, more comfortable in retirement? But also I think the last bullet might be probably the most important, is an outcome. Did a participant change the behavior you want to change? So if you want to increase enrollments, if you want to reduce the number of loans employees are taking because you're increasing their knowledge, did that happen? So being able to track that. But on the right-hand side are some of the more mature financial wellness programs starting to really track more indirect measures of success. Things like, is there cost savings, right, for the employee benefits? Do we see increased productivity, improve morale? You know, are we retaining employees? Are we attracting employees? Lower absenteeism? So all of those other things are maybe a little harder, right? You need a little bit more data to analyze, but really good to know for the evaluation of a program. And by, you know, understanding the success of the program, you'll know, you know, whether to continue doing what you're doing or do you need to modify, you know, some things moving forward. So finally, kind of to wrap all of this up with some of what you heard from Beth and Stephanie is, you know, what are some of the takeaways, whether you're starting one from scratch or you are enhancing one. It really came out like 7 major areas you'll want to look at and think about. So the very first one is think about surveying your employees to understand, you know, what are they interested in? How do they want to learn, right? Do they want to attend a seminar? Would they rather paper? Do they want things electronically, right? So take some time, and the surveys can be formal, right? They can be electronic and you gather. They can be informal, walking around and talking to individuals. Communicate the business case. Now, I know some of you might be the ultimate decision maker in your jurisdiction. Others, you may have to go to others to get funding or approval to do these things, but setting up the business case and kind of leveraging some of the stats that you heard here, you know, today from us of the importance of it, you know, all of that can help get buy-in because chances are at some point you'll either want other agencies to participate with you, you'll need time, or you'll need some resources to get it done. The third item is make sure it's culturally relevant and tailored materials. And you know, very often this goes to, you know, you may have first-generation savers as employees, maybe non-English speaking. So you heard, you know, Stephanie talk about translating into 3 languages, right? All of that is important to make sure that you're targeting the demographics that you want to target and speaking to them in a way that they will understand. Fourth item, and this was a great learning, I think, especially during the pandemic, but offer the program to non-employees, spouses, and dependents. It became easier during the pandemic because many of us were doing things virtual and everyone got more comfortable virtual, right? So if you happen to do an educational webinar or a one-on-one session with an employee, you can do it in the evening or off hours, and a spouse or a partner can join. Super important when it comes to retirement savings. You know, many spouses jointly decide when they're going to retire, right? So it's a common education for both, and maybe they don't have that type of education at their workplace, the spouse. And again, as more adults become more the sandwich generation, right, and we're taking care of family members, you know, other than children, financial literacy of a broader audience becomes more important, right, because it affects the family's bottom line. The next item in here is utilize technology and partners to deliver information. You know, Beth talked about using Brainshark, right, out there. Use text messaging, and I know that among the surveys that we did, only 3% of local government financial literacy programs were using mobile, text, and social media. And when you think about the younger generation, that's all they do, right? They're only on their phone out there. So, you know, just getting more comfortable in using that, and it's a low-cost way to get messages and information out. Number 6, encourage participants and employees to use what they learn. So not just attend, but take some action, whether it's updating their beneficiary, it might be changing a savings rate, but take some action based on what they've learned. And then, of course, the last one, we talked about evaluating the program. Believe it or not, nearly 1/3 of respondents that we had surveyed said that they don't currently measure it, a program. A financial literacy program. And if you don't measure it, you can't manage it, you can't help it move along, and you can't garner, you know, more leadership interest in enhancing it. So tremendously important as a kind of fully well-rounded program. So that kind of summarizes the things that we've discussed all across the board, and I'll turn it back to Beth as we do some Q&A.
Thank you. And there's a couple of things you just touched on that it just made me think that I forgot to cover it. So before I go into the questions, of which we only have 2, I know you guys can do better than that. Give us your questions. Come on, don't be shy. So the things I wanted to also mention is, as you're designing a wellness program or you're thinking about opportunities to engage with your participants, think about the various touch points where you can reach out. And maybe it's a campaign, maybe it's going through working with your record keeper, assessing what your beneficiaries look like. How many people do you have on file that don't have beneficiaries? Do a mailing campaign and reach out to those individuals. Think about your orientation, can you do touchbacks? And after if it's an electronic orientation, we all know this is deer in headlights approach. We have a gazillion benefits these days to learn about. Give it a few weeks, have your educators reach back out and call those new employees. It will be another access point. It will tell them and remind them about opportunities to engage and let them know this is a resource for them going forward. Look at your 50-plus group. Do a reach out for them. Make sure that they're aware of the additional ceiling they have for contributions. Look at your separation of service list. Who's ready to retire? Can you reach out to them? Can you tell them about the plan? A lot of people think that it's a myth that you can stay in the plan. They think, oh, I'm separating, therefore I no longer can be in the plan. We've had so many people tell us how much they appreciate getting that little touch on this, the tap on the shoulder courtesy call so that they could have those conversations at that point. And the other thing I can really try to encourage that's worked super well for us is identify your stakeholders. In NAGDA, we represent plans that are at state level, small level, medium level, all different size shapes. We get it. Demographics are different for whatever the plan is. But everybody has the stakeholders that they work with in government. So talk to your HR people, talk to your EAP, talk to your people who are doing workers' comp. There's a lot of people that can be partners in wellness in general, and you can also, like we do quarterly meetings with all of these strategic partners. Part of it is because we're all working on this wellness program, but it's an excellent way to cross-pollinate ideas, to share, to bounce ideas off of each other. And we also work with what we call wellness champions, and in our structure, there's a wellness champion per department within the city. And those people are incentivized by getting extra healthy rewards points as a thank you for doing that. They are the experts within their department. They know the culture of their department. So if we need to reach out and understand how many flyers do you need, what kind of presentations would you like, can we come and set up some consultations? Or on the flip side, you can make them the subject matter experts, and they're the ones that are relaying all the go-to information about the wellness program. All right, so going back to thanks, more questions, great. Okay, so one of the questions came through is, where does the funding come from for the program? I assume you're talking about the up to $700. That is part of the city's budget. It is part of, I think it's complementary to factoring out what all the budget costs are affiliated with the benefit program that we have. The city took it very seriously. Like I mentioned before, they were aiming towards getting their healthcare costs down. So this is an investment that they make towards that goal. So again, that's an example of strategic stakeholders and partners working together to kind of look at everything on the holistic level. Someone asked if I could share the baseline benchmarks for individual demographics. And I did look them up while we were finishing up our presentation here. So the date before we made our design changes with our auto enrollment was back to December of 16. So I'll just go through what the stats look like just for participation alone. So for gender, women were at 66%. Most recently, they're at 91%. Men were at 72%. Now they're at 88%. Looking at race, we looked at, Black employees were at 62%. Now they're at 90%. Latino was at 69%, now they're at 88%. All other employees were at 74%, and now they're at 89%. So if you want to look at design changes, that's a really good way to get your numbers raised right there. How do best plan sponsors measure program impact? Lynn spoke to that. Do you want to field that a little bit more?
Yeah, what I have seen is that it evolves over time. With the beginnings of the program, typically measuring participation and how many people do something, and then if they've attended a seminar, maybe what outcome, have they increased a contribution or done something. I think as programs mature, it's exactly where Beth was going. It's looking at different cohorts, so not just big picture numbers, right? But looking at different cohorts that you're looking to move the needle that aren't participating or are taking more loans, and ensuring that you're moving the needle there. And then, finally, it depends on what's important, right? Now for many entities, it's retaining employees and attracting new because of the Great Resignation. And so, we have seen that become a best practice now, but I do think, and what I've seen is it evolves over time, and it evolves based on the data you have to be able to measure this. Data is critical, and I know there's another session on data.
Thank you. Okay, another question is for the City of Milwaukee. Was the $700 incentive funded by the city? If so, was that a justified cost of public funds? Absolutely. It's an HRA. It's another benefit. I think it's 100% justified. It's showed our savings overall in spades. And it, like I mentioned before, it was funded by the city, but it was part of the benefit package. Since many employees may join a sponsor with assets from previous employer plans, have you explored incorporating roll-in procedures for new employees as part of financial wellness education? We have, in particular. We modified our plan about a year ago to allow for roll-ins to happen, and we do mention that to our new employees when we do the reach-out efforts for new employee orientation. We also incorporate that into our presentations for financial wellness topics that target new employees as well. Have you experienced issues with sending information via text, especially for employees who do not receive any type of cell phone or data stipends? That's an interesting question, and it kind of piggybacks with one that was from our last session. One of that question was, how do you get employees to share their phone numbers? So that's the first question before you get to this one. Most people use their cell phones, and I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of people don't want to use, for example, their employee email address when it comes to benefits. They want to keep it private. So you have to ask them for it. So when we have them sign up for the online scheduler for appointments, we ask for their phone numbers so we can reach out to them and use text as reminders, and we can give them links to the Zoom or through their email. And then we coordinate with the HR department. They have implemented a text notification system about employee benefits in general. And so it's an opt-in program, and you basically market it and solicit people to join. And if you have a rewards program, that might be a way to incentivize them too. If they haven't already given their information for that purpose, you can maybe incentivize them with some points that way. Okay. How effective was using emails to communicate, market the program? I always think the best way is to just flank people. Don't just use one method. Emails can be, it all depends on where people are at and what they use. It was mentioned social media. My personal take on that is if you do social media, you have to monitor that. So that's kind of an added flip side of the coin. We do not use social media, but it works for some people. But newsletters, we do an e-notify system for all employees, so it's a blast that goes out to all their city employee addresses. Or you could do targeted, like I mentioned, those campaigns. You could do mailings, you could do texts, you could do flyers. We've really utilized, especially during the pandemic, QR codes. Make it super simple. Give them a chance to just click on it. Everybody's using their phone these days. We're rolling out a survey, and I agree, we all love surveys up here. Ask your record keeper if there might be money in your communication budget. I didn't know there was, but apparently we had money in our budget, so now we're doing some fun incentives. And again, we're Milwaukee. What do? We tailgate. So we're doing all these fun things like for barbecued sets and coolers and chairs for our Packers and Brewers games. So just really try to customize your audience. What is it that is going to move the needle? And one of the things that we try to use our surveys to is to really get a temperature and a gauge of how much they know about our plan. And again, like what would work for them in terms of meeting them where they're at with some of the programming efforts as well. But it's a good litmus test to kind of understand where people are at and where you might need to fill in some gaps.
And so if I could add to that, I always go by the adage, you have to tell them 7 times, 7 ways, right? Some people, emails will work, others you need to do flyers. I mean, some of the old traditional things still work, right? A flyer in the lunchroom, right? Or tie something together with food. Everybody wants food, right, to get people's attention. But I also love that Beth talked about the champions. You know, having department champions, because, you know, they can get the message out in ways that we would never even think about out there, and I find that that's typically very effective.
And I'll say too, I know a lot of people who are doing plan administration for their defined contribution, deferred compensation plans. They wear a lot of hats, and so this is just like one of their many things that they're working with. Look at best practices and figure out ways that you can incorporate those with your plan. Work with a consultant. If you're not already working with a consultant, really think about working with a consultant for your board trustees' benefit as well. But they can work with you, something as simple as trying to get target date funds in your plan. That is something that is accessible, and if you do an auto-enrollment program, make that your default investment. So that is a foolproof way to make sure that people set it and forget it, and if they're not going to be engaged, at least you know that they have a good tool at their fingertips that way. Okay, I think we are out of questions, so you guys must be sleepy from after lunch, and that's okay.
You know, maybe one final comment, I forgot to mention this.
Oh, yeah.
If you're looking for ideas or you want to talk to individuals who have set up financial wellness programs, I would suggest reading through these. These are some terrific ideas that, you know, all of you have done. To me, this is great cocktail conversation, right, of what have you done, but there's some really creative things in here. So kudos to those who have done it.
All right, we grant you 3 minutes back to your schedule. Thank you all.
Thanks.